While all the fighters are getting dressed for battle, Al's going Commando. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys Mortal Kombat 11 Commando Spawn. Al Simmons, once the U.S. government's greatest soldier and most effective assassin, was mercilessly executed by his own men. Resurrected from the ashes of his own grave, and in a flawed agreement with the powers of darkness, Simmons is reborn as a creature from the depths of hell, a hellspawn. Now he is thrust into the world of Mortal Kombat, where he will fight for supremacy against all combatants. This 12-inch tall static Commando Spawn figure is highly detailed and comes showcased in a window box packaging. Just before we ask Al if he prefers boxers or briefs, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of Commando Spawn from Mortal Kombat that we could have a look at in this video. Grabbing now, though, the tape measure just to see how tall Commando Spawn is, and don't worry, we'll do comparisons also more in a moment. Commando Spawn, though, right to the very top of his head is about a 10¼ inch tall figure, and that's roughly about 26 centimeters in height. But just how tall is Commando Spawn, you may still be asking yourself. Would this help for comparisons? We can bring in the Mortal Kombat 11 Spawn that came included with the mace, that came included with the axe, that came also included with the sword. It's all the same Spawn. You can see that in this case, the regular Spawn from Mortal Kombat goes only still shy of actually reaching the elbow of Commando Spawn. Spawn as a commando is a lot taller than regular Spawn, although he's lacking a lot of the articulation. Talk more about that more in a second. Other comparisons we can also make too, while not clipping his cape. Let's bring in the mega-sized Violator. Always one of my go-tos when it comes to bringing in large-sized figures from McFarlane's team. We can also bring in Cygor. Good old Cygor. One of my favorite figures also. Let's just actually get him more in a monkey pose so you can see. Yeah, Commando Spawn is still taller than the Violator. And obviously in the pose that I've got right now, he's still a lot taller also than Cygor. For the figure's accessories, I might actually need to use both hands for this. Do you have a Frisbee? It might as well be. He comes included with his oversized Mortal Kombat display stand. And just to show you how big that is, bringing in a regular Spawn size stand. How much is that? Was it 15 times the size? I don't know. It's a pretty big stand though, nonetheless. Unfortunately though, it also uses a much larger peg. I know you can already think for yourself, hey, wait a minute. Hey, wait a minute. Let's just slide over. Not to interrupt your train of thought. Hey, wait a minute. Could you use this display stand with the oversized figures that we've already gotten from McFarlane's team? Like, oh, I don't know, like for example, like this guy right here. There were some people that had some issues with their Violator falling over and not properly being balanced. Could you use this Frisbee-sized display stand for a character like Violator? No. No, you can't. I wish you could, but you can't. The problem is the size of the peg, and just to pick up Violator so you can see what's going on here. The peg is actually a lot bigger. It's almost twice the size of the hole that's required for Violator's feet. So there's no way you'd be able to use it. You may be able to sand this down, but that would defeat the purpose completely. You can't use it with these feet. You can't also use it either with Cygor or any one of the figures that are the mega-sized. I wish you could, but unfortunately you can't. Sorry. I know that's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? But yeah, you can easily, though, take it in either one of Al's feet. Both of them do have pegels on the undersides. Now, if you granted did want to have Mortal Kombat facing forward, probably would be the most logical thing, then you would want to attach it onto this foot hole, and that would help the figure to be stable. The figure actually is pretty stable already on his own. It also helps the fact the figure doesn't have much in the way of articulation. The figure also comes included with a gun. I'm not sure really the model or make of this necessarily, but it's actually all cast here in sort of a dark gunmetal gray plastic. A few little stripes of crimson have been added there. And then you can see on the other side as well. There's a clip right here that for all intensive purposes, there's also a hole in his arm here, a hole on his hand. You could attach the gun that way. But it looks a little strange because it doesn't look like he's actually holding on to the gun. The more appropriate method, I would imagine, of displaying the gun in his hand is actually using this hand right here. His articulation on this arm just alone, there's nothing in his shoulder, There's nothing here in the gauntlet. The only thing that can actually move is his hand. So it's going to be making things a little bit harder to kind of get the gun in there because you only really have the hand to work with. Once that's in place, like you said, you can't actually have him displayed with the gun. And at least it gives him a purpose, at least for that side of his body. Providing again, I don't actually drop the gun out of his hand. Let's put that back in his hand. Sliding it in there. There we go. I think do I have it right this time? I think I do have it right this time. And yeah, you can at least then have Spawn with the gun in his hand. Now you may then ask yourself, what's that hole then on the other side? Literally on the other hand. Well, he does also come with this construct. It's rather interesting the way they've actually sculpted this. It's all been done here using a translucent green plastic. It kind of looks like something you would expect to see from Star Trek, but there's a peg right there. Now you already know where I'm sure this is going to be going. Just take then the hole that's in the hand and guide carefully guide the peg into there. There is not really necessarily a specific way to put it, but if you want to have like the fingers properly in there, like there's a hole right, you can see there's 2 holes right there that actually work the best to guide those fingers in there. So you really should put it this way. I'm not telling you how you have to do it necessarily, but I find this is the most comfortable way of getting it attached to Commando Spawn's hands. Kind of actually looks like he's showing off a membership card, like his energy is his way to get into a club. It's kind of strange. Still, though, because, of course, the figure doesn't have much in the way of his posability, yes, going back to that's going to be, like, there's only so many ways that you can actually display this. The hand only sways down back and forth this way, and his hand also, I mean, technically, you could also really, I mean, if you wanted to, you can have it attached this way, so it doesn't look like he's necessarily palming energy. It looks like he's actually just, like, constructing it, creating it in his hand instead. Maybe that would make the most logical sense instead of actually looking like he's high-fiving energy to somebody. Those are the accessories, though, that come included with the figure. Let's go ahead and take that off right now and go ahead and remove the blaster. Put that also to the side. And again, getting a closer look at Spawn, they already have clearly advertised this as a static figure. And what that means by that is basically all of the figures, mostly just a statued plastic. You can't really move much of anything on the figure. You can move his head. That can move back and forth. I guess we could technically look at the articulation a little bit early this time around. He does have kind of, not really a ball joint, because, I mean, it moves back and forth this way, but it doesn't move up and down. It looks like it's likely just a one large peg. So when it comes to rotating his head, all you can really do is what I'm doing right now. It sort of awkwardly does it in the way they've sculpted the lower half of his mask, like that kind of scarf that he covers across his face. Because there's a certain way they've sculpted it. When you turn the head this way, for example, you'll kind of notice that there's this little bulge that's developed at the base of his neck. You really want to have it based on the way they've sculpted it, I would imagine, either this way, or you can also have it slightly more this way as well. There is no articulation here in his shoulders, neither on both sides. There's no actually articulation either on the gauntlet, at least on this side, but he does have hand swivel back and forth. This hand at least benefits from having a swivel in his arm. Again, mileage may vary as to how exactly you want to have the figure, but at least you can swivel the arm back and forth, and you can also rotate the hand. He swivels at the waist. That's it. And then there's no articulation on this foot, and there's only articulation on the larger boot guard. So you can rotate that back and forth as well. So that's like 1, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Oh, and 7. So it's technically like 7 points of articulation. That's really it. Kind of does remind me of the old days of the McFarlane Toys Spawn figures. Limited in articulation, yes, but still decently detailed looking figures. I gotta say, like, though there are things about the figure I feel could have probably afforded a little bit of extra paint, like for example, like a lot of his body is just still the molded black plastic, but like I think the head sculpt is really good. I'm glad at least they've actually added a little bit of shadowing around the eyes to make those eyes look ominous, mysterious, and rather intriguing. And of course, he does have the mask that covers across the front of his face, so you can't see fully all the mask, but you get still a chance to see some nice sculpt work that they actually put into the actual main mask of Spawn. Some nice, decent texturing have also been added to the front scarf that he has. I don't even know, what would you call it, a scarf? It's not, scarf sort of diminishes how cool it actually looks. He has sort of like a mouthpiece that goes across his face. Like a turtleneck, like an extended turtleneck. You know, if you walk into a room and you're wearing a turtleneck, or you're wearing something that you can actually cover your nose and there's a strong smell being emitted from something, you can kind of pull it over across your face. That's kind of like what Spawn's doing right now. There's not much in the way of paint, but at least they've added it where it counts around the eyes. The white part of his mask still stays pretty clean to the white. There's not really a lot of paint added in there. And even like the crimson of the mask, there doesn't seem to be, at least, any darker colors that they've added to it. Again, there's some nice sculpting, but I think there really could have been an opportunity to add a little bit of contrasting darker colors. Again, when you get to the body, now he has, again, the more traditional M shape here for Spawn, but he doesn't have much in the way of anything else when it comes to paints. The sculpting is good to the body, sort of gives you a little bit more of a kind of a SWAT, layered, almost armor plating that he has to his body. Why Spawn actually would even need to have something like this, a little strange, but at least they've actually added some pretty interesting looking elements to it. It looks a little bit like Christian Bale's Batman suit, for example. He's got a few little grenades there on a bandolier. He's got a strap which has a couple of other bullets there also as well. These bullets, by the way, are all soft or plastic, but at least they get also painted a little bit differently than the color that they use for the bandolier. The bandolier is kind of more of a medium gray, and then the bullets themselves are kind of more in a, well, it's a more metallic silver. Of course, he's got the skulls there on either side that strap onto his cape. By the way, the cape, the way they've attached it, it's actually pegged to his body, so there's really no way you'd be able to remove it. The cape is actually neatly done. Again, you kind of got to kind of swing off to the side. Kind of looks like an old withering tree, like a tree that's kind of getting blown around in the wind, like in a dark kind of Halloween setting. Just kind of like the way they've done that. Actually, when you look at it, it kind of has almost even the texturing of a leaf. Again, they probably could have added a little bit of color, but I do like the color that they at least settled on when it came to this. There's a few little trace areas there of darker gray that's been added, but mostly they're just relying on sort of this wine purple coloring for the plastic. Then we get back to Spawn's body. You got a few little pockets there, holding some additional ammunition as he needs it. A few little pockets there also on the side here. He's got the skull there for his belt. I love when Spawn, anytime you can have a character whose logo can actually make up his belt buckle, that's pretty cool. Now, when it comes to actually articulating the figure, when you move it, when you take the torso and you turn it this way, unfortunately, you end up resulting in breaking up the molding that they've done here. So kind of keep things consistent, you kind of really have to have his torso turned this way. So at least it continues on that line of that line of white that they've got all the way down just below his belt line here. You've got a few little, almost looks like grenade canisters or grenade bullets there. And of course, you got a little holstered on one side, though not removable. He's also got himself a pistol. But again, like there's not a lot of coloring really happening here. I mean, you can kind of really easily see what has been painted and what has not. The black that hasn't been painted at least has been sculpted well. But I really got to wonder if they could have added just a little bit of silver or something added in there to make the plating look like it's standing out a little bit more, because you got the sculpting nicely done here on the stuff that's underneath the armor plating. But just to kind of break it up a little bit, it would have been nice if they could have added just, again, just a dry brush, even just literally taking a dry brush of silver and just brushing against this so that some of those finer features would stand out just a little bit more. On the one side, of course, non-symmetrical, he does have the big bulky boot guard, all these spikes that stick out the side of it. Again, some really nice looking sculpting. And he's got these slightly smaller, a little more tamer. He actually has the little leg guard there also as well, which seems to actually have longer spikes on this side than the shorter spikes on the other. And again, there's no articulation. I was kind of surprised to see that there's no articulation on the actual foot. While he has it here, I would have thought that they would have actually put it here, but still the figure doesn't really have much of anything. I know we've already kind of covered off the articulation, so we're not going to touch base on that anymore. But again, when it comes to displaying the figure, I think to have it kind of lining up the way I think they intended to have it, instead of actually having the waist this way or the waist this way, you really kind of have to have it just like that. So the body is going to be already on a natural turn, and then just sort of turn his head accordingly. Gives you a pretty good looking pose for Spawn. Now, when I have it like this, for example, want to make sure, of course, the boot guard is twisted out, because if you have it twisted in, that's when the figure's going to get a little bit more wobbly. If you have it like this, the figure's going to have a lot more tougher time to stand, and really the weight of the cape is going to pull him back. You really do have to take the boot guard and twist it out like this to give him much stable footing. And again, once again, we can go ahead and take, even though he does have really, I mean, you could attach it there, but we already looked at how kind of silly that does look. Let's go ahead and take the gun and put it into his hand. Get it in the one hand here. The plastic also, by the way, FYI, is a harder plastic, so it's a little harder to kind of get the handle in there. I didn't have so much of a problem earlier doing this, and now all of a sudden, as I'm trying to wrap things up here for just before we get to final looks, and then once again, let's go ahead and just have him actually palming the energy effect. Like the energy effect, And also, too, as well, like McFarlane's team did release a smaller version, a more articulated version of Commando Spawn, if that's the direction at least you want to go when it comes to picking up a Commando Spawn. What I like about this one, at least to its credit, is its size, being that it's already bigger than a regular Spawn, which we can bring in once again. It makes for it makes more shelf presence known, certainly when he comes at displaying this guy on your shelf. He is a little more on the limited when it comes to the articulation, but kind of does really remind me of like those older days of McFarlane Toys Spawn figures. Limited articulation, yes, but they actually made for decent looking statued pieces. Short of just a little bit of underwhelming paint that they've applied to the figure, I actually kind of like the look of Commando Spawn. For me, really, to display this figure on the shelf anyways, I'm not going to be moving his arms around, getting him in any really interesting poses. I think actually the pose that they've got him in right now, for example, is perfect. I mean, that's just the way I would want to display him on the shelf anyways. Could he have used a little bit of more paint? Yes. But for what he actually is, and even clearly the fact that they've advertised right from get-go that this is a static figure. In other words, the articulation is going to be a little more limited than your regular action figures that they've released. I don't mind the fact that he is limited on articulation because he does still deliver a decently cool-looking Spawn to be putting on your shelf. I realized I actually counted his waist twice when tallying up the points of posability. So we're going to go ahead and just deduct one of those, still giving us a comfortable 6 points of articulation here for Spawn. His head, his waist, his hand on one side, his elbow and hand on the other, and his swivel in his boots. And 6, considering that this figure is already being advertised as a static figure, is not bad at all. If you were to go to the standards of what they were releasing figures in the early 2000s, on average, those figures usually had head swivel, waist swivel, and maybe something in one of the elbows and one of the hands. And I guess they kind of carried over that as well to this figure. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I kind of like this figure, because it reminds me of those older days of collecting Spawns in the early 2000s. If you are in the market of getting a highly posable Spawn figure, maybe need not apply when it comes to this version of Commando Spawn, but don't worry. McFarlane's team did also release a 7-inch version of Commando Spawn that has still all the same articulation as that other Mortal Kombat Spawn that we looked at before. I haven't yet picked up that Commando Spawn, but when I do, I will do a follow-up review, and maybe I'll compare this one, the larger one that we looked at in this review, with the smaller one that has the much more posability. Now, 6, I think, is still a good number to go with when it comes to static. Though, I think that they probably could have added one other point of articulation. Anybody want to guess what it is? Yeah, you guys, we're all in the same mindset. I wish that the figure could have had a swivel on the other elbow as well. And while it's fine and good that he had it on the one side that has the energy construct, just think how cool this figure could have looked if he had also possessed an elbow swivel on the other side. I mean, it's fine to have the figure with his gun kind of parallel to his leg, but I would have liked to also been able to swivel the elbow out the exact same way as it did on the other side, where I could have actually had his gun drawn, ready to use it. Other than having one little bit of articulation that I wish the figure could have possessed, and maybe just admittingly a little bit of extra paint. Paint always goes just a little bit, goes a long mile. I mean, just by adding just a little bit of silver to some of the plates that he has on his suit, I think could have really enriched the look of the figure. Other than that, I just really like the look of them. What I'm putting him on the shelf for is not for a figure that's superposable, but what a figure that does show well. And I think Commando Spawn, short of the fact he does miss a little bit of the paint applications, does show really nicely on a shelf, whether you decide to display him with the Frisbee-sized display stand or not. What's with the size of that Frisbee stand? I wish, though, the stand, just as a side note, could have had a smaller universal peg, that if you didn't decide to use it with Commando Spawn, because he stands fine on his own, I could have then used it with a figure that maybe had some more balancing issues, like the mega-sized Violator. What do you guys think of the figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. Is this a cool looking figure? And do you mind the fact that he has limited articulation? Or do you kind of like the idea that it has almost a vintage looking McFarlane Toys Spawn design to him? Let me know down below in the comments section down below. And a big thank you once again to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the mega-sized static Commando Spawn that we can have a look at in this review. If you guys have had the chance to check out this video, obviously you guys are checking out this video right now, and you liked it, make sure you hit it with a like. And yeah, if you did want to stick around for more, because we're not just wrapping up shop right now with this Commando Spawn. There's going to be definitely a ton more Spawn figures coming your way. The key to making sure that you're not missing out on any of that, if you haven't already done so, is hitting the subscribe button down below, yes. Turning on the bell notification, yes. And even at the end of this video as well, popping up will be a playlist of not only other McFarlane Toys stuff that I've done, but also Spawn reviews that I've looked at over the years. So if you have a little bit of time on your hands and you're not really doing anything for the rest of your afternoon, check out those playlists. They'll be popping up at the very end of this video. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.